forward. All right, friends, welcome. It is week 4. Can you believe it? We are halfway done. Holy smokes. Which also means we are 2 weeks away from the exam starting, which is wild. We have not a, I mean, we have a lot to learn, but we're going to be A-okay, I promise. After this week, we should have almost everything we need. And then starting next week, we'll be able to put everything together, which would be really fun. A little bit of housekeeping, actually quite a bit of housekeeping today. We've got some discussion questions due by 11:59 p.m. Sunday night. As always, you've got 3 core assignments: Axios Pokemon API, routing practice, and Faker API. Faker API is an assignment that kind of looks like it's a little bit more challenging, than you would think, but it really is just having you build kind of some stuff. Might be in Express. Yeah. So it's over here in this Express version. We're going to talk about Express tomorrow, but it's just really having you call a class method to create this information. So it's not too difficult, but we can definitely make sure, and you install a package as well to make sure you do that. So this one kind of seems scary at the beginning, but I promise you it is not near as hard, especially if you've just done to-do list. Way easier. Cool. Just wanted to remind you, this next week, so next Monday, is a official check-in. So if you were on probation this past one, if you are kind of falling behind, that's okay. Yesterday was not an official check-in. But next week will be. So make sure that you are up by the end of the day on Sunday. Make sure you're at least above 60% assignments, and then make sure you're keeping up with your discussion questions. 60% is going to get you to, give me 1 second. 60% is going to get you to kind of falling behind, but that's okay. As long as you are above 60%, and then 90% is good to go. Anything below that will put you on probation. As a reminder, you only get 3 of those per class, or per just entirety. So it's not per MERN or JavaScript, it's per your entire time as a student. So don't want to have to kind of have you guys panic, like, oh my gosh, I'm on probation. And after the 3rd one, you get suggested to go on to oh my gosh, what is it? To be dismissed. So please make sure you don't do that. Don't want to have to deal with that or cause a lot of anxiety. So next week's official check-in, so make sure you're all caught up there. This week also, probably tomorrow, I'll be sending an email. Tomorrow, Thursday, I'll send an email for a class survey. Now, I know that we hammer you guys with surveys. Like, that is, I'm aware. I wish we did not. Just so you guys know, this one is important because it is a testament of what Paul and Gray and how we're doing. So this is great for us to learn. If there's anything that we can do to better your experience here, to help you learn more, then we can do that, or we love to hear that. Or if we are doing things that are helpful that you really like, then filling out the survey allows us to know that. Also, it allows our bosses to see that. This is, just transparently, I'm super transparent. This is like what our KPIs are built off of. So how good am I at my job? So if you guys feel like, and obviously I don't say that to kind of just like pander, but also if there really is things that I can do to increase your learning capabilities, the only thing I ask, I'm very okay if you have an opinion that I am not a great instructor. That is your opinion, and you are entitled to that. I just ask that you put, what I can improve on, because I'm always trying to improve. And if there is things that you like about me as your instructor, then having that there also helps me see what I'm doing well. Same thing with TAs. So that class survey will come out. We will spend a little bit of time, I think, on Thursday, just like 5 minutes for the first part of class, filling that out. It's just what they make me do. So if you can fill that out, that would be super duper helpful. Next thing I want to bring up, honestly, is just to-do list is hard. Oftentimes, this week 4, is where students start to question, can I do it? Am I even a developer? The imposter syndrome is high. And I really just want to reiterate, to-do list is very, 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 very hard. it is not a testament of your inabilities. It is not a testament that you're never going to be a developer. It is just a very hard assignment. It's hard for myself. It's hard for Gray. Like, it is a hard assignment. There's a million ways to do it. It's hard for Paul. Like, it's a challenging assignment. And so if you're leaving this past week being like, man, I don't know, I'm going to do it, I need to retake, or I'm going to quit, or I'm not going to be able to get a job, I ask that you just, those are real and those are valid feelings, but I ask that you just kind of put those aside and give this week a chance, because I think this week some things will tie in together, and the next week especially. But keep on pushing, just like Paul just said in chat. That is a hard assignment. If it came really easy to you, then that's awesome. Kudos to you. You're going to crush it. But if it didn't, that's also very, very normal. This is what I would say is probably the hardest assignment in the entire class. So again, if you're feeling defeated or you're feeling sad about to-do list, please just know that it is a very, very challenging assignment. And again, it's not a testament of your abilities. It's just a hard assignment that is aimed to make you think outside the box, which we talked about in office hour is a really, really common thing, right? There's not going to be such an easy path like we're going to lay out these next couple of weeks. Not such an easy path to do everything. You're going to have to think outside the box. So it's kind of like going and running for the first time, like really sucks. But then after a while, you're like, oh, okay, I feel pretty good. I can run a little bit longer and a little bit faster. So this is we've been running for a bit. We've got our mileage up, and then this was like a hill workout, and it just really sucked. And you're like, I can't run forever. Like, this is going to suck. That's what to-do list was. So, and lastly, I just want to say I'm so sorry. I realized something happened. I don't know what. I guess, dropped the ball and totally spaced and did not upload last week's video on Thursday. So that is now uploaded. That is thank you for those that let me know. That is uploaded. It's on the class sheet and it's on the platform. So sorry about that. And for some reason, not sure why the discussion questions, I thought I changed it. Changed it at the beginning of the class. So not sure why that reverted back, but they are open again. So if you did try to go do that, I am so sorry. But they are now open. They should be good to go. They close on Sunday. So should be good to go there. Any questions on housekeeping stuff? Okay. Just a little bit of a recap. We've talked about from a high level APIs. Let's go back to our class sheet. From a high level, we talked about APIs, and then we did an overview. I kind of broke down how an API works. We had the example of you're at a restaurant, the server goes and they make a request to the kitchen, they kind of go back and forth. We looked at Postman to really start using that. We'll start bringing in Postman this week. We'll start using that pretty frequently starting tomorrow. And then if Gray or Paul, you guys could help mute, or if you guys could mute, that'd be great. Andrew, thank you. And then we talked about higher order functions. We talked about callback functions, and then we talked about use effect. And so being able to use effect, what that means. If you guys need a little bit of a refresher, or if you need a little bit more of an explanation, I did go over that in office hour. As always, it'll be put right here. We also talked about the Pokemon API, and we looked into why does it always console log twice if you're in React strict mode. So it was a great office hour, in my opinion. Learned a lot of stuff, taught about a lot of stuff today. So it's a great one. So that's what we talked about. And where we're going this week is we're going to kind of finish up our front end stuff. Today, we're going to talk about Axios. So we're actually going to use effect and make a call using Axios, similar to how we made a call in Postman. We're just going to do that in code and kind of look at when we get a call, what happens. Let's break that down. And then we're going to learn about routing today. So today's a pretty heavy day, in my opinion. Tomorrow, we're going to learn about Node and Express. And so we'll talk about what is Express, what is NodeMon, and we're now going to start bringing in the back end. So today is the last day of our front end. And then tomorrow, we're going to bring in the back end, which is really fun. We're going to start having multiple servers, and it's going to be connecting, and it's going to be awesome. And then we're going to move on to MongoDB and Mongoose. We'll kind of start the structure of that and kind of introducing what is MongoDB, what is Mongoose, how do those work. We will go into our CRUD application while we're building that in the back end. I will probably make this, I'm just kind of thinking about it. I'll probably make this 2 class classes worth, because we have an entire folder structure we have to get through. We have to understand the back end. We have to understand what's going on. And I don't want to cram that tomorrow. So probably it'll bleed into this one, and then we can kind of integrate MongoDB and Mongoose. The good news is MongoDB and Mongoose is not a heavy concept. It's a very, very light concept. It's just adding in our database. Sounds really, really complicated, and it's not. Plus MongoDB stuff isn't until this day anyway with Jokes API. So we'll do that. And then we'll start really bringing in and finishing up MongoDB, and we'll start building an entire CRUD application, an entire sort of API in the back end. And then next week at the end of it, we will start our full stack application. I will have a wireframe that'll be very similar to the exam and what the exam is going to look like. And we're just going to start building that. Then week 6, we will add that in. So we're going to keep building it. We will have that finished. And then there will be some belt exam prep. Now, just as a reminder, I know that this is the absolute worst week for me to be gone, but I will be gone this entire week. I will be out of office. I believe Caden, who is awesome. He is very, very, very good. I believe it's going to be him. I don't know yet, so don't hold me on it, but we will have another instructor here teaching this week for you, being able to handle everything you need. So I will be out of office this week, and then I will be back week 7 after your exams have already opened. So I'll talk a little bit next week about what to expect with exams and how to send it out, and I'll get everything prepped for that. So we'll have that conversation before probably on next Thursday. So that's kind of what to expect coming up. Now let's jump into today's class. So we've talked about APIs. We talked about being able to call an API and grab some information, right? And we looked at this tool called Postman, and we were able to do that, right? And we talked about we can make a GET request to that. Well, we can use certain tools. Instead of just using a tool like Postman, we can add in some code that can do certain things. So in our office hour, all we did was in our app.js, we did quite a few things in our app.js, but we have this component called PokeDash. And then in our app.js, we have PokeDash. And we talked about use effect. But I'm going to go ahead and I'll just comment this out. So that way, if you guys want the code after, you can have it. Cool. But from a, let's actually move this code. I don't want this in my app.js. I want this in my Poke. Sorry, pasted that in the wrong spot. Okay. And then we're going to take our state and put this in our Poke as well. Okay. Now, I'm going to go through this code here in a second. But before I do that, I want to talk about what happens when we get our code or when we make a request. So if I go to our API section, right, we talk about REST APIs, which we've talked a little bit about how they can build upon it themselves. But really, at the heart of what we're doing is we're using this tool called a promise within JavaScript. And all a promise is it's like it is a function that allows us to make a request and sort of set up for an API call. And it is a way that we can set up some code in a pattern where we know, hey, we're going to get an eventual response, but we don't know how long that's going to take. So whenever I call this, we call and it returns a promise. What that's saying is, okay, and we'll look at that in a second, but it allows any code after it to be free to run. So it's what we call asynchronous, right? Where normally the way that JavaScript works is it goes line by line by line by line by line, right? And then once the top part's done, then the next one goes. What a promise allows is, hey, I'm going to call this request, but I might be able to do some other things as well, because I don't know how long my API is going to take. Let's say, for example, that we are calling the Pokemon API, and there's a lot of people calling it. So they've throttled the traffic. And so instead of it taking 100 milliseconds for me to get this back, it's actually taking 7 seconds. Well, if I didn't have it as a promise, our code would wait that entire 7 seconds, and then we finally would get that back, and that creates a poor user experience. And so what it then allows us to do is create or to utilize what we call a promise. Now, at the end of the day, you don't really need to know the inner workings of a promise in order to use it, but I want to just at least hit you with a couple of the main things. What a promise does is it's got 3 different states, right? It is a pattern of how we can set up some code that has 3 different states, and it allows us to communicate to backend servers, or it allows us to communicate to outside sources. So even when we have our own backend server, even when tomorrow we introduce Express, we are still going to use a promise because we don't know how long our API is going to be, how long it's going to take, right? And so it makes for a more asynchronous, continuous loading of my code, and it makes for a better user experience. Now, again, this is kind of more in depth than we need to know, but promises have 3 states. It's got pending, it's got resolved, and it's got rejected. The big 2 that you need to know about are resolved and rejected. And all that means is it's going to run this code. It's going to run this promise, right? And what this promise is going to do is it's going to have a resolve and reject. And what this means is it's going to have some condition in here. Our code's going to do something, right? And so if everything runs correctly, we have we make a request to an outside API and it all works. The request is correct. They say, great, here's your information. Then it's going to give us what we call a resolve. The way you can think about it is, hey, everything worked fine. You're good to go, right? Remember when I talked about an API and I said, what if I ask my server, I'm at a restaurant, and I say, hey, do you guys have chicken nuggets? And it's a vegan restaurant, right? The server is going to go to the back and say, hey, do we have chicken nuggets? I mean, they would probably know, but let's just say in this hypothetical, they did not. They're going to go to the kitchen. Kitchen's going to say, no, we're a vegan restaurant. They're going to come back and they're going to reject my request, right? Hey, we don't have that. We don't sell any sort of meat. We are a vegan restaurant. Now, let's go that I go to, McDonald's and I say, hey, do you guys have chicken nuggets? Well, they're going to come and say, yes, we do have chicken nuggets, and they're going to give us a resolve. So based off of my request, it's got a condition, the promise does, that's either going to give me a resolve or a reject. Now, the way that we handle it is that when we have a promise, or when we're using Axios, we're going to use this tool called Axios. When we're using Axios, it returns, or it is a promise, and we either use a dot then or a dot catch. What the dot then represents is this is what we got back. This is our resolve. This was good to go. They are, yes, they had what we requested. They gave us that information and we have it. A dot catch is, hey, if there's anything that goes wrong, if there's any sort of error, we requested the wrong thing, we put it in the wrong format, we didn't have the authorization, doesn't matter, right? Any sort of error where they said, no, we can't give you this, that's going to go in our dot catch. But in our promise, that is us getting rejected, which rejection is never fun to get, right? So the dot then accepts our, or is whenever things go well, it goes into our dot then. Everything operates perfectly, it goes into a dot then. If it does not, then it goes into a dot catch. So that is really, and we're going to look at Axios here in a second, and we'll kind of play with it, and we'll see, well, what does this response look like and all that stuff. But that is really, from a high level, all a promise is. It is a pattern of code that allows us to make a request. It's really, really kind of popular with APIs, right? Both Fetch, if you used Fetch at the beginning, or Axios, they both use promises because it allows, again, if we're using outside resources, we don't know how long it's going to take. So we're going to return a promise, and it's either going to give us a resolve, meaning, yes, things are good. And the way Axios and handles this is a dot then, right? Or we get a reject, and that is a dot catch. Cool. Now, Axios, I keep saying that word. There's different ways that we can call this API. Now, in the platform, you might see something like fetch. Fetch is another way that we can do this. but I'm going to show you Axios and I'll sort of show you why fetch, why I'm showing you this. We will eventually use fetch in week 7 after the exam when I show you, hey, there's another way we can do this. So we'll have that. But for right now, we're going to use Axios and move forward. And I'll kind of explain a little bit of the difference. There's really one main difference, and then it's sort of the same.
Hey, Will.
Yeah.
Jared had a pretty good question in chat. Does it have to be resolve and reject? Do they have behind the scenes functionality?
Yes. Yes. So promises, there are 3 states that is handling, which is resolved, reject, or pending. Now, when we are dealing with, this is a promise. We're not building any sort of promises. This is just what a promise does, right? We're not building this promise. We're just going to be calling via Axios an API request, and that in itself is a promise within JavaScript. But we are not building any of these promises. Great question, though. I think it's going to make sense whenever we deal with Axios. So in order for us to even use Axios, Axios is a tool that as we are, again, fetch is kind of vanilla JavaScript. Fetch is a sort of vanilla JavaScript, meaning we're not using any outside packages, just JavaScript. That is what is used, kind of built in. But then Axios is a tool outside of built-in JavaScript or native JavaScript or vanilla JavaScript, which is a third-party library and allows us to do certain things that are a little bit easier than how Fetch handles things and cuts down a little bit of the code. So let me just address, Jared said, but at the end, we still use res and Yes. So for a promise, the promise itself is resolve and reject. When we get this back, what it gives us, this resolve, right? These are keywords. This value we take in as response. This could be anything. We usually take this as a response or error. These can be anything, right? These are just taking in some sort of value, but they represent resolve and reject, right? They represent, oh, here's our response. Everything was good to go. Here's the response we got back. That's what res is, response. And then, oh, nope, it was rejected. Why was it rejected? This error. And so it passes in the error. But yeah, this could be unicorn or cupcake if we wanted. But these are keywords within JavaScript or within a promise, which is JavaScript. Yeah. Great question, though.
I have a question. If we have a nested if statement, do we call like then and catch once, or we can call it multiple times?
You can chain a dot then. You can chain a dot then, like if we had, when we're dealing with consuming APIs, I believe it. Like here you have a dot then, and then once you have that response, what it returns, you then have a dot then. Another thing, if you wanted to console log it, so here's 2 of them, so you can chain them. Like if I wanted to do something else, then that's fine. Yeah, so you can chain these as well. Again, we're not building any promises. So if you guys are thinking like, oh, I have to build this, I know that in coin flipping you do, but we are not building promises. That is not something that we would have to know. That's not anything that's expected. But yes, you can chain dot thens if we need. If we need to do multiple things with it, yeah, we can absolutely do that. Okay. So again, Axios is a tool that we can build in and bring in. And the way that we do that is we need to first install Axios. So here we do npm install Axios. And so that is within my client, right? So if I'm within my client, I've already done it, but I need to go into my client. And then I would just say npm install Axios. And it's going to say condition already met. Perfect. Great. So now Axios is installed. I can come here into my package JSON and make sure. I'm using it. Oh yeah, it's right here. Sorry, line 9. Cool. So yep, I now have access to Axios. So let's go actually use it. Now I talked about use effect and how if I have this empty dependency array, right, then what that will do is off the bat, when this is mounted, it can run some code, whatever's in between these curly brackets, right? Knowing that this will only run upon the mounting of this component. And then after that, it's not going to run anymore. So this is a great thing that we can do where we can use effect to say, okay, great. When this mounts, I want this to run this code. I want to go and I want to get all my Pokemon. Let's say we're building an application and we wanted to show all of the Pokemon, or we go to a person's page and they want to see all their friends, right? So before or as it mounts and as it goes there with this single page application, I want to grab all this information, right? It's imperative for my application to work. Well, that's where I can make my API request. So there's a few things that I need to do. First off, I need to import React, and I need use state and use effect, right? So I'm going to use state, comma, use effect. Now, the last thing I need is I need to import Axios from Axios, because now we have this new tool, right? We have access to it in our package JSON. We saw it, but I need, in order for me to use it, I need to import it. So now I have access to both. Great. Save this. Now what this is doing is this is saying, hey, when Pokedash is mounted, which right here, when we run app.js, this is when it's mounted, right? So when app.js is ran and then Pokedash is mounted, then we're going to use our use effect and we're going to make our first API call. So the way we do it is we say Axios dot get. Now remember, get is just, I want to get some information. If I wanted to give some information, and we'll talk about HTTP verbs in the next couple of days, that's a dot post. And there's a couple of different things with dot put or patch or delete. Those are kind of going to be the ones that we handle. But for right now, I'm just saying, I just want to make a get request to, and then I put my API link here. So I'm going to this base URL, and in this specifically, I want the Pokemon. I want Pokemon. So what this is doing is this is going to give us a promise, right? And if I just hover over this, we can see, oops, that this is a promise. Where was that? I'm going to hover over this. Cool. So this is a promise, right? And so then you can see, you obviously can't see my hand, but it's on fulfilled, meaning, okay, everything was good. This is our resolve, or on rejected, meaning like, hey, this is not, this is either resolved or it's rejected, right? So if it's resolved, meaning everything went well, then it gives us back this response. And I want to look at this response here in just a second. If there is an error, then it runs into my dot catch. Let's say I have a whole bunch of stuff in here. Like it doesn't just have to be one line. If I have a whole bunch of stuff it's doing, or if I have multiple dot thens, if any of them give me an error, it's going to go into this dot catch. It's going to give me the error and it's going to console log it. So right now, when this gets mounted, right, when this component is ran, we're using Axios and we're making our GET request, just like we did when we used Postman on Thursday. Making a request here. If everything goes well, we should then take the response that we get back from the API. I'm going to console log it. If there is an error, then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to, it's going to go into my dot catch. I'm going to handle my error accordingly. And again, because this is empty, this is only running on the first mount. So if I come here, this is not running. So I say npm start. Cool. Great. So this is my code, right? And I can see, and we talked about strict mode, it mounts it twice, like in development. So that's why we have two of these. But if I was in production, it wouldn't. But here is my response. So this is what my promise gives me back, right? I've got this config. I've got a whole bunch of information there. My headers. I've got some data, right? Which we have data dot results. Okay. Okay. So here's all of my results back. It's 20. I have a whole bunch of other things like request. Doesn't matter. The thing we need to care about in this case, and anytime you're dealing with an API, it's going to come back differently. So we need to make sure, or it can come back differently is more of what I should say, is here within my response, because that's all I'm printing, right? That's all I'm console logging is my res. And again, this can be anything. This could be called unicorn if we want. This is just a variable, right? This part is. And so if I wanted, I just console log unicorn, it would be the same exact thing. And so within this res, I've got this key of data. And within my key of data, I've got this array of values, right? Cool. So I've made my API request and it's given me back everything I've wanted. So what I could do then is say, well, great. I know that I want my Pokemon. So I'm going to say set Pokemon. And what I want it to be, because this is an array, I'm saying, well, I want to set it to the array of results. So now when I refresh this, I can look in my components. I go into my Pokedash and I see that in state, I've got access to all of this information. Right? I have access to all this information. Now, if I wanted to map through it or do anything, I can, right? But now I have access to it. And so this is my Axios request. Now, if I were to say Pokemon, let's see what happens. Let's go back to my console. And I make a refresh. Look, I got my error. My dot catch hit and it's 404 not found. What that's saying is, hey, I don't know what Pokemon is. Right? We tried to go here and that isn't anything that we have. So we got a 404, a bad request. And so what that tells me as I'm coding is like, oh, that doesn't exist. Do I have a spelling error? Do I have some sort of process, especially when I'm dealing with APIs, that I set it up incorrectly? Did I accidentally do 3 slashes? Let's test. I don't think it'll. Let's see if this will break it too. Yeah, it failed, right? Saying I don't know what this is.
Someone
So
asked to get back to line 14.
yeah.
Yeah.
So all we're doing is when we make this request in my API, we saw that in my response that there was a data.results. Maybe I'll just do that first. .data.results. Let's just console log this. So I make my request. Cool. And this is my data.results. This is an array of all of my Pokemon objects, right? Well, if I've got a piece of state called Pokemon and set Pokemon that's equal to some array of Pokemon, because I've got this array here, I can just say, well, I want to go ahead and set my state to this value. Like I could have done something. I could have handled it maybe in a, yeah, well, actually I wouldn't handle it another way. This is how I would handle it, right? But here's my response. Within my response, I've got a key of data. Within my key of data, I've got a key of results, and that value in itself is an array of all these results. And you can see my little square bracket right there. So this is an array of all of my results. And now all I'm saying is, hey, cool, let's go ahead and set my Pokemon to that array. And so now if I wanted to do something, so like, let's say I wanted to like map through. Let's just try this. I need one more curly boy. And a. This one. Now I can map through all of my information because now they're in state. Somebody said, what do data and results represent? That is what our response given back is. Right? We make this request to this API. And then within our promise, remember, if it's resolved, it sends something back. And this is what it sent us back. And so we look and say, cool, what did the API respond with? And we looked at our res and we said, okay, well, there's data. Great. So res.data. And then within that, there was a results. And so that is what our actual response, if I were to say, if I come here, here's my response, right? That's just our res. Then if I go one further and I say, well, within res, I see this data portion. That's what this is. And I see within data, oh, there's this key of results. Makes sense. So then here's our results. And it's just that information. So somebody asks, can I do a P tag? So it looks like this API request gives me two things, name and URL. So what I could do, those are the only two pieces of information we have. So I could say something like P tag. And then say poke URL. Okay, I'm hungry. You can tell. Perfect. And so now I have this URL for this specific Pokemon. So if I wanted specifically Bulbasaur, I would say pokeapi.com.co.api.v2.pokemon/1. That is Bulbasaur. Switch those. Now, if I wanted other information, I would have another API request. But just for this request, this is all we get back. Looking at the chat. I know that this is kind of a heavier, bigger concept. Yep, just exactly. When you console log response, you'll see data. We did that. Back to my code. All we're doing is we're saying axios.get. Guys, this is no different than when we did this on Thursday and we had our post. We did Postman and we just made a request and it gave us a response back. Now we're just handling it in code. It's doing the exact same thing. We're just saying, hey, if everything goes good, put it in this dot then. If not, put it in this dot catch. This is my error. And then now we're just saying, great, now that we have these results, well, let's do something with them. Let's set our Pokemon to these results. Yeah, thanks, Paul. Our data is like a big maze. So some APIs give different keys and give different areas, right? Or so we got to kind of figure out, well, what is our response that we're getting back? Jennifer, I'm not understanding your question. I'm sorry. Why have the two different return code sections? Yeah, I'm
On
sorry.
the top portion, you have your use effect piece and we're set Pokemon, the results data results.
Yeah.
So we're saying instead of, and I may just be misunderstanding, instead of console log, so we don't want to write to the console, we want to write to the page. So we do set Pokemon, or is it the return section that's actually like starting on line 21? Is it the return section that's actually printing the results to page and not on your console?
Yeah, so great question. So just taking out Axios, right? Set Pokemon, if we're just dealing with state, right? This is just
Mhm.
running this function, set Pokemon. And then now, if I were to look at Pokemon, that is this new array of Pokemon that we got from our API. So it's just this entire array right here.
So it'd always be on the right-hand section in your console. It wouldn't be on the left-hand side of your page, print to page. Like it would be,
Yeah, so this, remember, we're just dealing with when we have like state, or we have some sort of functionality. If we had that validator, when we have forms,
Mhm.
handlers, that's all up here. This return is what is returned. This is what you will visually see, your
Okay.
HTML side. So we updated our state using set Pokemon to this array of Pokemon. And then now down here in our returns, you can kind of just forget about that for a second. All we're doing is we've got this state of Pokemon, which is an array of Pokemon, and we're just mapping through it and saying, cool, let's go ahead and do our dot map, and let's show the information we have access to.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Did that make sense?
Yes.
Cool.
I just think for a minute there, I got confused in my mind because I felt like we were getting results either way. It was just
Totally.
which one was actually printing to the page versus which one was just
Yeah.
capturing it and holding it and
Yeah.
then only printing to console log versus what we could actually visualize.
Yeah, that's a great point. If I don't have this, then this will do nothing. But there's nothing there.
Mhm.
This console is just because I'm console logging, right? Our user's never going to see this. This is just because I have inspect open. But here's our normal page. If I inspect it, then we can see our console and we see, oh, okay, great. We have this array of all this information. Because I do the set Pokemon, that then sets up our state. Now, whenever I run .map, there is an actual value. If I don't run set Pokemon, because of how we set up use state, set Pokemon is just empty to an empty, or is equal to an empty array. Not until I actually update set Pokemon and say, no, now I do have a new value. Now Pokemon's updated and I can map through it. So all we're doing is manipulating state here. We're using an API. We're taking that response and we're saying, cool, now I want to keep access to this. I want to be able to map through it. Let's go ahead and throw it in state. And so we throw it in state, and then it works just like we normally would, right? Just like state normally works, where we can map through it. We can show whatever piece of information we want to have.
That means we always get back data results like a target and values.
I'm sorry. No, I'm not following.
Like when we console log and we get data and results, right? And then so we always get that like as a key, like we get for the target and value for our input for forms.
Oh, if it's always, I don't. Let's try another one because I don't know that it's always this. So let's say like, yeah. So each API sends a different sort of response. So it's not always going to be res.data.results. So like if I were to say,
You will often see a data key though, that is reused a good bit.
yeah. So if I were to say something like this, let's just take this, do another use effect. I do that, and then I have my dot then. So if everything goes well, I just want to console log this response. And then let's just do this. Dot catch. Oops. And then we've got this guy. So now what this is going to do is let's get rid of these consoles. This is just going to call, this is still going to call this. We're still going to set our Pokemon. Right? But then this one's going to console log our response. So if I come here and I refresh this, we still get our Pokemon. Let's see. What was the issue? Swappy.dev API/people. Maybe it's API. Oh. Yeah, so here we go. So here's what we get. We get our data. Now this is our swappy. It's still within res.data. And then we do get results for this one. So same sort of thing. I could say this is the swappy API, and I want to say dot data dot results. Results. Now if I come here and I refresh, not why. So now you're seeing it's taking a little bit. See how long that took? That's why we do a promise, because we don't know the swappy API compared to this Pokedash was quick, right? And see how long those both took for us just to get this information. But now we have this. And we can see we have a lot more information within each one here because we've got birth year and created ad and eye color and gender and all that good stuff. So in this case, it just, you would want to always check your res, check your response, make sure it's got a dot data and dot results, and then you're good to go. But you always want to check and make sure. You don't want to assume that. But that was a perfect example of why we use a promise, because we didn't know how long that's going to take. But we still, if we wanted them to see the Pokemon, how much faster it is. So allows other code to run. Great. We can see this. This is what's visualizing. We're still waiting for this other request. We're still waiting. We're still waiting. We got the first one. There we go. Now we can do something with it. So, okay. Can you just put a 1 in the chat if this is making sense? Put a 0 if you are so confused. Great. I've got one thing I want to talk about. And just to make sure that you guys are ready for assignments and stuff, is now we've introduced this, and we can we'll keep reiterating this. I just want to make sure that I introduce it to you. Is notice when we're dealing with components right now, there's only one way we can show them, or there's really kind of two ways, right? Either I put this in app.js, or I have some other component and then I call it within this component. But I don't always want all of my components to run at the same time, right? Or I don't want them to always be visualized. Part of the power of a single page application is based off of what my user needs. I can bring certain pieces of information and do that, right? And show that, and I don't need to show everything all the time. Well, this is where this idea of routing comes in. So you can think about routing as basically a path on how to show certain pieces of information. So here, just at the very kind of level, we see that my route is login.codingdojo.com/m/146/6952/50303, right? This route allows me to get to this page specifically. The minute I change this, you can see that this 807 is based off of this information, right? This stayed the same. This 146/6952. If I change this 6954, now I'm in a different section, but it's still 146. So this is saying, hey, we're in MERN part-time online. Whatever number this is indicates what section I'm in. And then whatever page I have clicked on, that indicates this guy right here. That indicates what page I'm on. So if I go to routing, 65, so this is even dependent on which section within this page I'm in. So what section I'm in. If I'm in Intro to React, Functional Components, APIs. And so this is what allows us to kind of hide pieces of information or only show what is relevant when our users want to do that. The way this works is we just have, here's our URL. So we've got our HTTP. This is our protocol. You've got your subdomain, your main domain, and your top level. So this is just kind of basic, right? Google.com, that kind of thing. Then you have your path that allows you to put in some information that allows you to distinguish between anatomy of a URL and what is routing, right? Based off of the path. Now, we are going to talk about tomorrow. We'll talk about use navigate and use params, but I just wanted to introduce you to React Router. This is another tool that we're going to download. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go out here. I'm going to say npm install React Router DOM. And so this is going to be another package that allows us to handle different requests based off of what our user wants, right? And so instead of having everything appear inside the app.js, we can set up actual routes that say, hey, when they go to, something, when they go to just a slash about, well, I want to show my about page. When they go to my slash, I want to show just my other component or my about component or my home component. Now, in order for this to work, we've downloaded it, and I'm going to go over a little bit over today. So just a heads up. There's 3 new components that we need to kind of deal with. And then when I say components, I don't mean an actual component. I mean new pieces of information. Sorry, not a great vocabulary there. Well, really 4. The first one is going to be browser router. Now, what this is going to allow is us to set aside, hey, what are my routes? Browser router encompasses this app and says, great, here are my routes set aside. Here are my specific routes. Then you're going to have the actual parent called routes that within that is going to house all of your routes. And this is just how React Router DOM works. And then lastly, you're going to have your actual route, and then you're going to have your path. And then what do you want to do? So let's go ahead and do that real fast. There's another way we can do it to where we don't have to put all of this in our app. And so let's go look at that. I've downloaded our React Router DOM, right? That's already there. So if I were to go to my page here, I should see in my package JSON, I see React Router DOM. Great. We are good to go. Now, a few things have to happen. We do have to import. But one thing I'm going to do is instead of, so I'm clicking around, it's probably confusing. Instead of putting my browser router in my app.js, I'm just going to put it in my index around my app. Right now, we don't have multiple components or we don't have multiple like applications and we're not dealing with any of that. So I can say something like browser router, and then around this, got browser router. And now this says anytime I have routes within my app, actual app.js, it's going to handle it. Both ways work, but in order for me to do this, I need to import browser router from React Router DOM. This is in my index.js. After I do that, I'm never touching this file again. Cool. Now, what I can do is if I follow this, right? I need routes. We've already handled browser router. You could do it this way too. Both ways work just fine. But I need my routes in the actual route itself. So if I go into this guy, right? And it looks like we are in our return. So we have it where our information is. So I'm going to say routes. Perfect. And you see that it automatically brought in that because I imported and because I pressed enter. So we need this to not be, I kind of had it self-closing, sorry about that. And what I want is, I'm gonna close this real fast. Great, so this is now closed. And in between, let's create our actual path. So we're gonna do two paths. We're gonna do one for just our pokey. And then maybe we'll do one for our Star Wars. We'll just do that real fast. And then we'll, Star Wars .jsx. And we'll take that code and we'll decouple it. So that way we can do that use effect and we can have some information. So that way we can go from one to another. Perfect. Take this. Put this up here. Because I'm using use effect, I need to import Axios because I'm doing an Axios call. Also need to import use state and use effect. Okay, in order for me to use both. If I'm wanting to keep this information, I need to have a piece of state, right? So I'm gonna say const Star Wars, set Star Wars, that's fine. And then instead of console logging, I'm going to say set Star Wars. Perfect. And lastly, let's go ahead and map through Star Wars. Now I need one more curly boy or one more. Perfect. Okay, so now I have two components. What this is doing is doing the same thing as our Pokemon, right? But instead of Pokemon, we're just calling the Star Wars API. Same sort of thing. And this is just showing star name. Star's a weird name. Maybe we'll say user or person. Star's weird. Okay. Now, what I can say is within my routes, I have a specific route that's going to be of Pokey. We'll say Pokemon. And what that's going to do is only when they go to localhost 3000, which is our main route or main sort of server, right? Localhost 3000 / Pokemon, then I want to show this component. On the opposite side, let's say I did route. Oops. Not ID. But I wanted to do Star Wars. I wanted to bring in the Star Wars. Now what this is going to do is it's going to say, great, only when I go to Pokemon, will it bring and mount this component and show me this information. When I go to Star Wars, that is going to show this Star Wars information. And so now let's see what happens. Let's see, we got a error. Oh, I didn't start my server. That's fine. Route is not defined. Oh, did not bring it in up here. No routes named this. So if I say a component of home, okay, and then let's go back and add in a route for that. Make sure that that brought in. Yep. Now if I come here, home, oh. That was showing because I still was showing this component within my app. So now if I come here, I just see home, right? Just this home component. Now, if I go to the route of localhost 3000 / Pokemon, I get all my Pokemon. If I go to the route of localhost 3000 / Star Wars, it takes a long time because the Star Wars API, but let's give it a second. There we go. We get all of our Star Wars. And so what this allows, and Paul said it greatly, it allows for us to view different pieces of material, or now we're starting to actually get into where we can grab our component and swap it out and say, hey, when my user goes to this route, I want to show this piece of information. I don't need to worry about Star Wars when they're looking at Pokemon. When they're looking up, when they're looking up Star Wars, they don't need to worry about Pokemon, right? And so now it allows us to change the view of our user based off of the specific route. So let me go back into the chat and see. Yeah, so Jennifer said, we're basically building navigation. Exactly. That's exactly what we're doing. All we're doing is we're setting up, hey, how can my user navigate our application? Or when our application is being ran, when our user navigates, what do we want them to see? Now we're able to customize exactly what they're wanting to see. Okay. So let's talk about this. This is our route. This path is, again, what is our user going to type in? Element is when this is typed in, when this path is requested, what do we want to show them? In this case, we want to show them our home component. So somebody asked, if your nav bar is in home, how will it get to other pages? If we had a nav bar, then what I would do is I can, and I'll just do it here, right? Remember, I can still make this look a specific way. I could say something like, home, right? Remember, I can call a component within a component. So if I had a nav bar, this would just be able to go there. Or if I wanted it against, no matter where I was at, I wanted it to always have a nav bar. That's when you could put it in your app.js, like up here. So you can like put persistent nav bar here if you wanted. If you wanted it for only specific times, you wanted specific nav bars, then you could have that. Like this code, and this is dynamic. And so one thing I want to note is this is all one component. This changes based off the unique identifiers, and we'll get there when we're dealing with, we're actually looking at certain Pokemon or we're doing something like that. So this is what we call it being dynamic. We'll talk about this tomorrow more when we're talking about use navigate and use params. Params allows us to pass in some information and it's dynamic. So in whatever city, it's going to take in location, right? Maybe location does something, but all of this is just one component. And all that changes is, well, based off of the information. So like when this is hovered over, you can see at the bottom left, it gives me the exact piece of information. Well, then we can do that. Then it will basically go up here and it says like login.codingdojo.com colon or /m : it could say something like stack and then section and then lesson. right? And that allows it, but we'll talk about kind of use params and navigate tomorrow to kind of make it more dynamic, just like this. And then there is another one, yeah, that is called link, which link is like just an A tag. So here's this link here. And so it's just basically an A tag. And so instead of, we can't do A tags here. But from a high level, it just kind of is that, yeah, like Paul said, it behaves a little bit different, but you can kind of correlate it to that. So Teresa asks, how would you style this? I mean, it depends on how you want it, right? You could just style your component. And so if you had like a different CSS for your whatever, as long as you bring it in, just like you have it here. So whatever component is being rendered, it's going to go and it's going to grab that information. So if you have like a CSS for your Pokemon, if at the top here, it said like import, pokey.css, then it's running this code and then it will take in all of that. Or yes, only Bootstrap. Or yeah, you could podcast L, you could do apps.css and style kind of everything. But if you wanted it specific to each component, you could do that too. Either one. So somebody said, Tabitha said, so I have a launchable / accessible website that I utilize through GitHub. And my HTML is the unique piece that route you to the new page or API. So I'm not exactly following what you mean there, Tabitha. And yes, Jennifer, we will keep going through this.
Sorry, I posted it in the chat. So the portion right there that says Rowdy Hacks 2023 Moon HTML, that's the portion that it routes to. Like, is that what you're saying?
So
GitHub is the portion that we're going to, but it reroutes me to the web page that I made in HTML.
yeah, so it would, so we aren't going to talk about it till tomorrow, but see this guy, this just means, hey, I'm expecting some value to be after location. I don't know what it is yet. And so in this case, within each of your github.io /rowdyhacks 2023 / it's github.io, and then it's just expecting some sort of value that's going to be like a unique identifier of Rowdy. And then in this case, it's Rowdy Hacks 2023 / some other unique value. And based off of that, that is what is connecting whatever your application or your website is or whatever it is. So it's looking at the Rowdy Hacks /Moon, and that is the pathway to that file right there, or that application or whatever you're running.
So maybe I did miss a portion of this, so I apologize if I'm asking a question. That is my bad, and I really re-watch it. But like, if you have multiple slashes routing you to multiple different portions, does it still do the same thing? So like, if you had 10, that seems excessive, but 10 different slashes, each of the slashes, as you backspace them, will route you to a new portion of a component or a page.
Well, it depends. So if you had 10 different components, then yeah. But here, so if we just look at this as an example, right? The only things that are changing is these three right here, right? And so based off of these three, this says this is MERN. This is within this section of React routing. And then this is these 801.8.1 is this specific lesson. And so what would happen is there would be a route. And again, we will talk about this tomorrow because yes, we did go through a lot today. The specific route would be something like route path equals, and then let's say it's probably got some base, but we'll just say login.codingdojo.com/m/ and then it would have this colon that just says stack / lesson or section / lesson. Now, what this allows is it's saying, hey, I'm expecting there to be a path here. This I'm expecting to change. The colon allows it to be dynamic, meaning, hey, expect something. We're going to call it stack, section, and lesson, right? Just expect these values, expect these to be different, but it doesn't have to be hard coded. Like right now, this is hard coded. It has to be Pokemon. It has to be Star Wars, right? This is creating a dynamic route, meaning, okay, cool. We know what to do if we get some sort of information, some sort of identifier right here for stack, identifier for section, and identifier for lesson. And so what happens is this is how we're setting up our routing. Then when we're actually in our code, because we would have access to all of this information, this is a link, right? These are just links. And if you look at it on the bottom left, it's kind of hard to see. I wish I could blow it up. But the bottom left, it says login.codingdojo.com/m/ and then it has 146.6952.50302. This is this specific address for this specific piece of information. So if I click this, what's going to happen is it's going to go into my database and let me grab section MERN 6952. So React routing. And then I want the week 2, day 3, right? Based off of the different values on the bottom left. If you see like down here, what I'm looking at. And so this allows it to be dynamic. So I only have to create one route. I don't have to create a specific route for 146.6952.80177, 146.6952.80178. I don't have to do that. I only have to create one. Allows it to be dynamic. And then based off of what number, basically what a user clicks on, well, then it loads, it has access to this information, and then it loads what it needs. So with your code, is it saying github.io / some value, some folder / some HTML file. And so when you click on that specific one within that link, it'll go to that's the kind of, it's like if your friend's like, oh, where do you live? Here's my exact route or address. This is how you go. That's what it does. And it grabs that information.
Okay, that totally makes sense.
Yeah.
So like a GitHub React folder that I've been pushing, like all of the things that I've been learning in React specifically step by step. And so each one of those are going to have their own unique, like at the top of the page, it says 80180. That's going to take them directly to whatever file it is, whatever it's named. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, that totally makes sense. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Great question. We did go through a lot. We'll talk about more tomorrow. We talked about a ton today. Today was probably one of the heaviest days we've had. How are we feeling? Are there any questions? I'm done teaching. Any questions? Okay. Well, with
Real
that,
quick, Will, sorry, real quick. And I think that was also a question in the chat at some point. But I was wondering, why did you put the what is it, the first route into
Browser
the
route.
index.js instead of like in the video it shows that he puts it in the app.js? Yeah, the browser route.
Yeah, you could do
browser
either.
router.
Because we don't have any additional kind of apps. Like if you had multiple apps, then you probably wouldn't do this.
Okay.
But because you didn't like this, because we don't, and we're just handling with one application, then we can do it here. And again, I try to show you guys multiple ways versus like you guys see it on the platform. Here's another way to do it. But yeah, you could absolutely just get rid of it here and then put it in here and it does the exact same thing.
Yeah. Okay. No, thanks for showing us.
Yeah, no, of course. Absolutely. Any other questions, friends?
Yeah, like in our route, elements can be anything or just that the key.
No,
Like-
element is our component that we want to render.
Mm.
So it is either home or poke or pokey or Star Wars.
And sorry, like I said, I came in late. So Pokemon and Star Wars are both APIs that we used.
Yeah, so we talked about APIs and Axios.get. We made requests that then set our state
Okay,
in
yeah, I
each
see that
one.
we use some promises and stuff in here.
Mm-hmm.
It definitely makes a little bit of sense. I'll have to rewatch. I just wanted to verify what that
Yep.
forward slash was.
Yep. So that's what that is that just allows us. So Star Wars, same thing, just an API that we call, get the information, set it in state, and then we iterate through it. And so all this is doing is saying, hey, at this one is just our home route. So if they just go to localhost 3000, then it's going to bring home, right? Like welcome or login page if you wanted, whatever. If you wanted to go to /Pokemon, that's only going to pull up this guy right here, right? Unless we had some sort of component on the outside, like if you had a persistent nav bar, then it'd do the nav bar plus Poke, right? Or Star Wars plus nav bar. So this is how we can sort of set it up here. And so this is just calling the component that we want to render when this specific route is called. Cool. Well, I'll leave this here. I'll get rid of this. Clean this up a little bit. Okay. Other than that, friends, I hope you guys have a wonderful night. Yes, Paul, it's Taco Tuesday. Have a wonderful night, guys. Take care.
Thank you, Will. Have a good
Yeah.
night.
Thank you.